And I hurt two little girls, so I deserve to be punished.
When gang leaders receive life sentences, their reactions are often explosive. From anger to shock, they lash out in disbelief as the courtroom seals their fate. In this video, we'll uncover the most intense and unforgettable responses to a life behind bars. Number 12. Victor Rodas. Victor Rodas, a member of the infamous MS-13 gang, orchestrated a crime that still shocks the community. He lured 17-year-old Raymond Wood from his home.
Mr. Rodas more than likely will be spending the vast majority of the remainder of his life behind bars,
pretending it was a simple drug deal involving marijuana. But what followed was a nightmare. Rodas abducted Wood and drove him to Bedford County. There, with other MS-13 members, Rodas carried out a brutal attack. According to the reports, the victim was stabbed repeatedly and finally succumbed to his injuries. The violence was swift and merciless. In court, the prosecution argued that Rodas had planned the murder. They pointed to threatening text messages exchanged between Rodas and Wood before the unaliving. They said this crime was the result of growing tension between the two. The defense tried to paint a different picture. They claimed Rodas had picked up Wood willingly and dropped him off, unaware of what was about to happen. They argued Rodas was just a bystander, not a participant in the murder. The defense also suggested Rodas was afraid of another gang member, Caius Ventura, who they said ordered him to drive the car that night. They insisted Rodas wasn't directly involved in the stabbing and acted out of fear. But the evidence was clear. Rodas, one of 5 MS-13 members charged with first-degree murder, couldn't escape his role in the crime. When the verdict came, 55 years in prison, Rodas showed no emotion. His face remained blank, even as his fate was sealed. The courtroom agreed. Justice had been served. Rodas received the sentence he deserved.
Meanwhile, 3 MS-13 gang members are now facing upgraded charges in connection to the murder of Lynchburg teen Raymond Wood.
Yet his story is a grim reminder of the dangers of gang life, where violence is constant and loyalty is fleeting. This wasn't the only time a gangster got a sentence that felt like justice. There was the case of the notorious Young Thug, who faced charges of attempted murder and participating in criminal street gang activity in Atlanta, Georgia. Number 11. Young Thug. Young Thug, a rapper who has been in the mainstream hip-hop scene for more than 10 years, is not new to fame. He is famous for his versatility and has worked with renowned artists such as Drake, Chris Brown, and Travis Scott, among others. It appeared as though nothing could stand in his way, but in reality, a sinister plot was silently unfolding that resulted in his arrest. The arrest of Young Thug, which happened on May 9th, 2022, shocked the music fraternity. This was not your ordinary case of legal battle.
The judge in Young Thug's RICO trial orders the rapper's attorney to jail for contempt.
It was a massive sting aimed at 28 people in his record label, YSL Records. This already includes 56 counts of varying degrees of charges, some of which are serious charges under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act. The allegations were severe: murder, attempted murder, robbery, assault, selling of drugs, and even threatening witnesses. What truly shook the industry was how prosecutors built their case. They didn't just use traditional evidence. They used Young Thug's own lyrics against him. The rapper had managed to turn himself into the only source of proof they needed to convict him. Songs like Anybody and tracks from his album Slime Language 2 were cited as proof of his alleged gang ties and criminal activities. In Anybody, he rapped, "I never killed anybody, but I got something to do with that body."
I never killed anybody, but I got something to do with that body. I got the streets on my back.
A line that prosecutors claimed was a clear admission. The indictment didn't just accuse YSL Records of being a music label. It labeled the group as a criminal street gang involved in various illegal activities. The case against Young Thug isn't just about his music. It's about what prosecutors say is a criminal enterprise hiding in plain sight with Young Thug as the leader of the vicious gang. The charges are serious and could result in Young Thug facing up to 25 years in prison. Number 10. George Gueld Thomas. George Gueld Thomas, a name that once struck fear into the hearts of many, was the ruthless leader of one of South Africa's most notorious gangs.
Stay away from drugs, guns, alcohol.
But his reign, marked by unrelenting violence, eventually met its end when justice finally caught up with him. Born in the turbulent 1970s in Cape Town, Thomas grew up in a world where poverty and violence were daily realities. The harsh streets of Cape Town were his playground, and from a young age, survival often meant making choices that would later seal his fate. No one could have predicted that this boy, shaped by desperation and hopelessness, would rise to infamy as the feared gang leader known as Violence. As Thomas grew older, the lure of gang life became irresistible. Drawn to the power and protection that the local gangs offered, he quickly found himself immersed in their world. It wasn't long before he joined the ranks of the 28s, a subgroup under the notorious Numbers Gang, one of the most dangerous in South Africa. Thomas's fearlessness and ruthless determination to protect his territory earned him a fearsome reputation. His influence grew, and with it, a loyal following that helped him establish dominance over his neighborhood. Under Thomas's rule, businesses were extorted for protection money, and those who dared to defy him were met with brutal violence, solidifying his nickname, Violence.
Hello? Hello?
The headlines were soon dominated by stories of Thomas's brutality. His gang was implicated in countless acts of violence, including murders, assaults, kidnappings, and drug trafficking. As his criminal empire expanded, the list of atrocities linked to him and his gang grew longer. Law enforcement couldn't ignore the wave of terror any longer. A massive operation was launched to dismantle Thomas's empire, with undercover agents risking their lives to infiltrate his gang. Gathering the evidence needed to bring him down was a painstaking process, but the authorities were relentless in their pursuit of justice. The day of reckoning finally came. George Gould Thomas found himself on trial, facing a barrage of charges that included murder, assault, and racketeering. The courtroom was charged with tension as the prosecution presented an overwhelming amount of evidence against him. After weeks of intense proceedings, the jury deliberated. When the verdict was delivered, the Western Cape High Court sentenced Thomas to an effective 175 years in prison. He received life sentences for each of the 7 murders he was convicted of. In May, Judge Chantal Fortuin found Thomas guilty of 7 counts of murder, along with multiple counts of racketeering, conspiracy, attempted murder, theft, and illegal possession of firearms and ammunition. His victims included Angelo Classen, Glenston Martin, Yusri Abrahams, Haywin Stridham, Cecil Barnes, Gresham Boyson, and Nidine Davids. Thomas and 18 of his co-accused initially faced 166 charges when the case began 4 years earlier. However, 2 of the accused, Fred Williams and Jason Stinder, were acquitted of all charges, though Williams was murdered shortly after his release. Despite the gravity of the sentence, Thomas shocked everyone by grinning widely as the judge's verdict was read. This next case delves into the chilling story of a criminal whose physical transformation is as terrifying as the heinous acts he committed. Prepare to confront a tale that will send shivers down the spine of even the most hardened criminals. Number 9. Caius Veiovis.
Today, Kimberly is standing by, and I know after an otherwise quiet week of deliberations, this was a rather dramatic end to this case.
Caius Veiovis, once known as Roy Gutfinski, emerged from the depths of the criminal underworld in the late 1990s. Veiovis quickly carved out a reputation as a ruthless and feared figure in the local gang scene. His journey into darkness began with a crime so disturbing it set the tone for the violence that would follow. In 1999, then known as Roy Gutfinski, Veiovis served nearly 7.5 years in prison in Maine for a crime that shocked the community. He and his 16-year-old girlfriend engaged in a ritualistic blood ceremony that involved them hurting another teenager. The injury required 32 stitches to close. At that time, Gutfinski claimed to be a vampire and a Satan worshiper. This persona would only grow more terrifying as he later changed his name to Caius Veiovis while incarcerated. Fast forward to August 2011, and Veiovis committed a crime so brutal it defied comprehension. The trio kidnapped and murdered David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell, using a weapon resembling a machete. Their remains were later unearthed on private property in Beckett. The motive? Glasser was marked for death to prevent him from testifying against one of Veiovis's co-defendants, while Frampton and Chadwell were slayed simply to erase witnesses.
Killing of Edward Frampton, Robert Chadwell, and David Glasser in Berkshire County.
The story took a darker turn when a witness from Home Depot in Pittsfield took the stand. Earlier in August 2011, William Gregory, a store employee, recalled how Veiovis, accompanied by Eric Fox, came to purchase saws. Gregory couldn't forget Veiovis's unsettling appearance. He testified that Fox picked up a hatchet and mimicked chopping up something before they eventually paid for a Starfold wrench set and left. This brief encounter would later become a key piece of evidence in the case. The trial moved from Berkshire County, culminating in a verdict without doubt about Veiovis' guilt. After a week of deliberation, the jury in Massachusetts found him guilty on all counts. 3 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of kidnapping, and 3 counts of witness intimidation. Under Massachusetts law, these convictions carried a mandatory sentence of life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Veiovis had pleaded not guilty to all charges, but the jury saw through his facade. When the guilty verdict was announced, Veiovis, with 2 rows of horns implanted in his forehead and a 666 tattoo etched into his skin, erupted in fury. He screamed at the Springfield jury, declaring, "I'll see you all in hell, every single one of you. I'll see you all in hell." His chilling outburst only cemented his reputation as a remorseless and irredeemable criminal, a gang leader who embraced the darkness within him without hesitation. Number 8. Antonio Davenport. The criminal underworld of Durham, North Carolina, witnessed a chilling escalation of violence, fueled by gang rivalry and a thirst for revenge. The story centers around Antonio Nathaniel Davenport, known as Lil Tony, and Derek Lamont Dixon, also known as Smack, both members of the 8 Trey Gangster Crips, a notorious street gang involved in everything from drug trafficking to witness intimidation. Davenport, who also performed with the Durham-based rap group 83 Babies, used his music to glorify the gang's violent lifestyle, rapping about gun violence and drug deals. The catalyst for the ensuing violence occurred on August 14, 2019, when Davenport was attacked by rival gang members at the streets at South Point Mall in Durham. Adding insult to injury, the assailants posted a video of the assault on Instagram, taunting Davenport and his gang. Enraged, Davenport and Dixon, along with fellow gang member Deval Nige Magwood, known as Paco, plotted their revenge. That very evening, Dixon and Magwood executed a drive-by shooting in South Durham, setting the stage for a tragic sequence of events. In the days that followed, tensions only escalated. Davenport exchanged threatening messages with a rival gang member on Instagram, further fueling the desire for retaliation. On Sunday, August 18, 2019, the plan for revenge was set in motion. Davenport, armed with a 9mm handgun, Dixon with a .40 caliber handgun, and Magwood with an assault-style 7.62mm pistol, set out to hunt down their rivals. Their target was a car they believed belonged to the individual who had taunted Davenport online. 9-year-old Zion Person was simply enjoying a summer evening, riding in his aunt's car with 4 other children, on their way to get snow cones.
30 minutes, a local rapper found guilty of murdering a 9-year-old boy in Durham.
In a heartbreaking twist of fate, Davenport, Dixon, and Magwood misidentified the vehicle as that of a rival gang member. As Davenport followed the car down Leon Street to the intersection of North Duke Street, he and Dixon unleashed a hail of gunfire, discharging over 20 rounds into the vehicle. 2 of those bullets struck Zion, tragically ending his young life. The boy's 8-year-old cousin, who was sitting beside him, was also injured in the attack, further complicating the crime for Davenport.
Federal charges including murder and racketeering.
He was wearing an ankle monitor due to his other pending charges of domestic battery. The location data of the monitor put him at the scene of the murder as well as at Dixon's and Magwood's house prior to and after the shooting. Security cameras of a middle school close to the scene recorded Davenport's car trailing behind the victim's car only a few minutes before the shooting. In an effort to remove any possible evidence, Davenport took his car to be painted black just a few days after the murder. A 9mm handgun was also found later on by the investigators in Davenport's girlfriend's car with the blood and fingerprints on the weapon matching the incident. Dixon entered a guilty plea on the 11th of May, 2021 in the federal court, wherein he admitted to charges of engaging in a racketeering conspiracy and murder for the purpose of racketeering. Davenport met his fate on the 7th of July, 2022, after a jury convicted him of murder in aid of racketeering, using a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence, and causing the death of another using a firearm. Both the men had criminal backgrounds, which can be dated back for several years. Davenport had a prior record of felony larceny, second-degree burglary, and fleeing to elude arrest in 2016, while Dixon had numerous felony records from 2012, robbery with a dangerous weapon, and breaking and entering. While Davenport listened to the words of the judge who gave him a life sentence, he did not show any emotion, contrary to the mess his actions caused. However, The case that follows is yet another story of violence and revenge and shows the hidden aspects of gang life and the impact it leaves on neighborhoods. Number 7. Abel Gallegos. In the crime-ridden streets of Colorado, few names inspired as much fear as Abel Gallegos, a high-ranking member of the notorious Crenshaw Mafia Bloods gang. Born and raised in the rough neighborhoods of Jefferson County, Gallegos seemed destined for a life steeped in violence and crime. From an early age, he became involved in the operations of the Crenshaw Mafia Bloods, a ruthless organization that ruled the streets with brutal authority. For years, law enforcement struggled to pin down Gallegos, whose cunning and knack for evading capture, but his reign of terror would reach a horrifying peak in November 2018, in an act of violence so heinous that it would finally bring him to justice. Late on the night of November 5th, the sound of silence was shattered by the heavy gunfire. The victim was 28-year-old Simone Duran, whose life was brutally and senselessly taken. Gallegos, along with his associates Alonso Quintana and Rene Rosales, had lured Duran, a woman he had connected with on social media, into a deadly trap. What unfolded next was an unspeakable act of violence. Duran was not only assaulted, but also imprisoned in the back seat of a vehicle. The trio then drove her to a dark, secluded spot at 8th and Nile in Golden. There, in a chilling display of ruthlessness, Quintana and Gallegos shot her numerous times before setting her remains on fire. The community was left reeling from the senseless act, as Duran's friends and family were plunged into grief. The investigation that followed revealed the sinister motive behind the murder. Simone Duran had previously identified Gallegos as the shooter in a separate crime, unknowingly making herself a target for his deadly retaliation. This wasn't just murder, it was a calculated act of vengeance, a message to anyone who dared to challenge the gang's power. Despite his history of eluding justice, Gallegos' luck finally ran out. Law enforcement, driven by a relentless pursuit of justice, managed to apprehend him, bringing him to face the full weight of his crimes.
Sir, and they ask about her every day. They wake up in the middle of the night crying for her.
As the evidence against Gallegos piled up in the courtroom, the horrific details of his crimes were laid bare, leaving no doubt about his guilt. After weeks of intense deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty. The once feared gang leader now faced a lifetime behind bars. In a powerful moment, the judge addressed Gallegos directly, condemning his actions and the profound impact they had on the community. Judge Philip McNulty, who presided over the sentencing in this case, expressed his deep shock at the utter disregard for human life displayed in the crime. He said that Gallegos had no place left in society anymore. The sentence was severe, but fitting: life in prison, with an additional 163 years to ensure he would never again walk free. Through it all, Gallegos remained emotionless, showing no signs of remorse for the lives he had destroyed. But this next case dives even deeper into the twisted minds of those who choose violence as their path, revealing the cold, unforgiving nature of life on the wrong side of the law. Number 6. Pedro Espinosa. Pedro Espinosa's story is one that shakes the core of anyone who hears it. On March 2nd, 2008, in Los Angeles, he took the life of 17-year-old Jamiel Shaw II, a promising high school football player. Shaw's only mistake? Carrying a red Spider-Man backpack, which Espinosa believed connected him to a rival gang. As Shaw walked home from the Beverly Center, he was ambushed by 2 Hispanic men. The attack was brutal, and he was shot multiple times. Despite being rushed to the hospital, Shaw's injuries proved fatal. But who was Pedro Espinosa? He wasn't just any criminal. He was a member of the notorious 18th Street Gang and living in the U.S. illegally. Just months before, in November 2007, he was arrested on gun charges and for assaulting a police officer. Yet, in a turn of events that would haunt Shaw's family forever,
Loving them and you're doing things, thank God for that. Because there's people like that, don't give a damn.
Espinosa was released from jail 4 months early, on March 1st, 2008. The very next day, he claimed Shaw's life. Fast forward to May 9th, 2012, and Espinosa is convicted of first-degree murder. Just 2 weeks later, on May 23rd, 2012, the jury sentences him to death. But what's most chilling is Espinosa's demeanor during his sentencing. He sat calm, almost detached, except when the judge ordered him to pay for Shaw's funeral expenses. That seemed to strike a nerve. Espinosa had openly admitted to authorities that he was willing to murder for his gang, even if it meant facing the death penalty. He even bragged about wanting to land on death row, seeing it as a badge of honor to prove his loyalty. Despite his lawyer's arguments that Espinosa didn't receive a fair trial and had a weak defense, Judge Ronald Rose was unwavering. The evidence was clear. Espinosa had meticulously planned Shaw's murder and even boasted about it afterward. On the day of sentencing, Shaw's parents and friends filled the courtroom, all wearing red. But this wasn't a gang symbol. It was a representation of the blood that had been spilled. Jamiel Shaw Sr., the victim's father, voiced the anguish of a parent who had invested everything in his son's future. "You don't have a right to execute someone and then plead not to be executed," Jamiel Shaw Sr. stated firmly. His life had been devoted to preparing his son for greatness. "We really thought we had a chance," he lamented. "My son was groomed to succeed." Anita Shaw, a U.S. Army sergeant, wasn't just a grieving mother. She was a soldier called to face the unthinkable. She recounted the moment she was in Iraq, on her second tour of duty, when she was summoned by her commander with the worst news any parent could receive. Her son had been murdered. "I lost it," she confessed. While scripture might call for forgiveness, Anita Shaw admitted, "I'm not that strong of a person." Throughout their emotional statements, Espinosa remained motionless, avoiding eye contact with the family. Judge Rose pointed out that Espinosa had been released from jail on an unrelated charge shortly before the killing. He had been warned by an officer about the severe consequences of further criminal behavior, yet he chose to ignore it. Before the sentencing concluded, Judge Rose urged the Shaw family to focus on raising their 13-year-old son, Thomas, who was present in the courtroom. Outside the court, Jamiel Shaw Sr. reflected on how gang violence had transformed the role of parenting. "You're not raising them anymore," he said with a heavy heart. "You're trying to keep them alive." The murder of Jamiel Shaw II didn't just devastate a family, it ignited a firestorm of political debate about Los Angeles as a sanctuary city. The controversy centered around Special Order 40, a policy designed to protect communities by preventing local officials from questioning residents' immigration status.
And I just couldn't understand why a gang member would just come out and take somebody's life.
The debate continues, but one thing remains certain: Jamiel Shaw II's life was stolen far too soon. Number 5. David Adam Pate. David Adam Pate, a man whose appearance alone could send chills down your spine, stands as a haunting figure in Lancaster. With a split tongue and tattoos that read 974 and Satan etched on his forehead, Pate wore the marks of the insane gangster Disciples gang proudly. In October 2013, Pate lured 33-year-old Ricky James into the woods under the guise of sharing wine. Ricky James, a man with a fondness for the bottle, was vulnerable when he drank, often trusting the wrong people. That fateful cold night, his trust fell into the hands of a man with a collection of knives and masks in his home, a man who would make sure Ricky James never lived to see the sunrise. James was no stranger to hardship, but nothing could have prepared him for what awaited in those dark woods. Pate was prepared and armed with a butcher knife, eerily similar to the one wielded by Michael Myers in the Halloween movies. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the community. In the courtroom, the pain was palpable, as Antoine James, Ricky's brother, trembled with rage. He demanded that Pate look at him as he spoke, but the judge denied his request, forcing Antoine to direct his words at the back of Pate's head. The horror didn't end with the stabbing. Pate attempted to conceal his gruesome act by hiding James's body near a bush, where it was discovered by children a month later. When questioned by police, Pate coldly confessed to his intentions. He planned to sever James's head from his body and return to the scene to hide the body, driven by a desire to slay again.
It appears that this murder, even yet, seems to be completely senseless.
He admitted to tying James up with a rope from neck to ankles, intending to drag the body to a nearby creek. However, his drunken state left him too exhausted to finish the job. Pate's criminal history was long and disturbing. Since the age of 17, he had been in and out of prison for burglary and other offenses. At the time of his arrest, he was already behind bars for disorderly conduct, but it didn't take long for authorities to link him to James's murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Over 20 knives, more than 20 masks, and DNA that tied him directly to the crime scene. Even his family couldn't ignore the signs. They reported seeing Pate covered in blood, attempting to burn his clothes after the murder. Since his arrest, Pate has shown no remorse. In fact, he often smiled when recalling the slashes he inflicted on Ricky James. His only regret? Not being able to hurt his victim more because he couldn't find the right hacksaw blade among the many knives in his room. Pate's matter-of-fact confession to the police was as chilling as his crime. "I just couldn't get through the bone," he stated. with the same casual tone one might use when ordering breakfast. Psychiatrists who evaluated Pate's mental state found no signs of insanity, deeming him competent to stand trial. His actions shocked the community, leaving even his brothers to label him as the devil. In the end, Pate admitted to the murder and was sentenced to life without parole. His reaction? A blank expression, devoid of any regret, a final testament to a man who felt nothing for the life he so brutally took. Now, we delve into a shocking case involving a group of at least 5 gang members responsible for the savage murder of an innocent teenager. Number 4. The murder of Leandro Jr. Guzman. On June 20th, 2018, Leandro Jr. Guzman left his Bronx apartment, intending to meet a friend. But when he spotted 4 cars, fear gripped him, and he began to run. The gang members, ruthless and relentless, chased him down the block. Desperate, Jr. sought refuge in a bodega on Bathgate Avenue, a small grocery store that should have offered him safety. At first, the bodega owner hesitated, unsure of what was happening. But as Jr.'s terror became evident, the owner relented and allowed him to hide behind the counter. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. One of the gangsters spotted Jr., dragged him outside, and delivered him to the waiting group. What followed was a horrifying attack with machetes and knives. Jr., fighting for his life, tried to escape back into the store, but was forced out once more. The brutal scene was captured on surveillance and cell phone videos, showing Jr. stumbling out of the bodega, bleeding, and running towards a hospital just a block away. Tragically, he collapsed near the hospital and succumbed to his injuries. The motive behind this gruesome murder? A tragic case of mistaken identity. A gang member's cousin, Stephanie Acho, and her boyfriend, Irving Ozuna, were involved in a video featuring an intimate act. Fearing for her boyfriend, Stephanie falsely identified Jr. as the man in the video, simply because he bore a resemblance to the actual person involved. To lure Jr. into the trap, she deceitfully asked to borrow money. The senseless killing ignited public outrage, with the hashtag Justice for Jr. going viral on social media. Authorities swiftly arrested 14 members of the Trinitarios gang. Among them, the 5 attackers from the video, Jonique Martinez Estrella, Jose Muniz, Elvin Garcia, Manuel Rivera, and Antonio Hernandez, were convicted of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, gang assault, and conspiracy. Their punishment? Life sentences without the possibility of parole. When the final gang members were sentenced in January 2023, they displayed no emotion. The murder of Leandro Guzman Feliz sent shockwaves throughout the city, sparking fear and demands for better safety measures. This tragedy led to the proposal of Jr.'s Law, a measure aimed at installing panic buttons in small businesses to prevent such horrors from happening again. Yet despite the devastation they caused, none of those involved have shown any remorse. But in the next incident, we encounter a case where the perpetrator did express regret for his crime. Number 3. Tariq Jackson. The story of Tariq Jackson is a sobering tale of how gang life can lead to devastating consequences. In 2015, in Ypsilanti, Michigan, Jackson was convicted for the murder of 20-year-old Keandre Duff, a crime rooted in the violent rivalry between the Ypsilanti gang Rack Life and their enemies, BOH.
And it's all in an effort to address a recent spike in crime and gang violence.
As a member of Rack Life or its offshoot, Finesse Gang, Jackson found himself entangled in the deadly world of gang violence. But what makes this case stand out isn't just the crime itself. It's the moment of reflection that came during Jackson's sentencing. As the courtroom fell silent, Jackson turned to face Duff's family, offering an apology that carried the weight of his regrets. He spoke about the harsh realities of gang life, admitting that the path he had chosen wasn't worth the 16 years in prison or the looming threat of death. His words were a stark reminder that the allure of gang life often leads to nothing but pain and loss. Duff's mother, Marquita Claiborne, then addressed Jackson directly. In an extraordinary display of grace, she told him that she forgave him and urged him to seek salvation through God. Jackson, visibly moved, nodded along as she spoke, absorbing her words. When given the chance to speak, he reiterated his remorse. "That was the lifestyle that I chose to live," Jackson admitted, reflecting on his past choices. "I was young, angry, full of pride, caught in the streets, in the middle of gangs. I thought that was the best choice for me to make." Jackson also brought up the haunting memory of Keon Washington, a 17-year-old whose life was tragically destroyed at a party in the summer of 2014. Although Duff had been charged with Washington's murder, the case was dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Jackson, clearly tormented by this unresolved case, expressed his sorrow for Washington's mother, who still hadn't seen justice for her son's death. "It's been 4 years," Jackson said, his voice heavy with regret. "She hasn't gotten justice or peace of mind while the killer of her son still walks free." In a moment that resonated deeply, Claiborne also turned to Jackson's mother, offering her prayers and comfort. The two women embraced after Claiborne's statement, a powerful symbol of the shared grief and humanity that transcends even the most tragic circumstances. Jackson's guilty plea wasn't limited to second-degree murder. He also admitted to armed robbery, weapons charges, and lying under oath. For his crimes, he was sentenced to 17 to 40 years in prison, a sentence that reflects the gravity of his actions and the devastating impact of his choices. But the story doesn't end here. Next, we encounter a convict who betrayed even those within his own gang, leading to a murder that shocked everyone involved. Number 2, Manuel Rios. The case of Manuel Rios is one that reveals the dark and treacherous side of gang life.
While rich 25-year-old Lee Rios was sentenced today to life in prison.
In 2015, Rios was found guilty of first-degree murder for the cold-blooded slaying of 18-year-old Kenneth Lopez in Springfield, Massachusetts. Both Rios and Lopez were members of the notorious Latin Kings gang, but a bitter falling out between the two led to an irreversible tragedy. What makes this case even more gripping is the betrayal that unfolded within the Rios family itself. Nelson Rios, Lee's own brother, took the stand against him. In a testimony that shocked the courtroom, Nelson revealed that Lee had confessed to shooting Lopez in the back with a .38 caliber gun. This confession wasn't just a moment of sibling rivalry. It was a calculated decision by Nelson, who had struck a deal with prosecutors to lessen his own charges related to firearms. But the web of this crime extends further. 3 other individuals, Valerie Medina, Daryl Self, and Jonathan Guevara, found themselves entangled in the aftermath of Lopez's murder. These city residents, all connected to Rios, were charged with conspiring in the killing and being accessories after the fact. The details of their involvement, though murky, painted a picture of a tight-knit group willing to go to extreme lengths to protect one of their own. As the legal process unfolded, all 3 pleaded innocent in Superior Court, but faced the reality of further court dates. Until then, they remained behind bars, with bail set at $50,000 cash for Guevara, $15,000 cash for Self, and a choice of $15,000 cash or $150,000 surety for Medina. Guevara was held at the Berkshire County Jail in Pittsfield, alongside Lee Rios. Lee's crimes didn't stop at murder. His criminal record was littered with charges of robbery, drug offenses, and other serious crimes. When the final verdict was delivered, Rios was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fate that left him stone-faced and emotionless as the sentence was read aloud. But as we move forward, the story only grows darker. This next case includes a dramatic reaction rarely ever seen in the courtroom. Number 1, Liddell Maynard Sparks. The events that unfolded on the morning of June 22, 2020 in Columbus, Georgia, took a dark and unexpected turn. Police were initially called to the intersection of 17th Avenue and Nina Street with reports of a 9-year-old boy lying dead in the road. But when Sergeant Walter Haywood arrived on the scene around 7:30 a.m., what he found was far from what he had been led to expect. There, face down against the curb, was not a child, but a grown man, dressed in shorts, a t-shirt, and socks, but no shoes, and most importantly, no identification. The victim was later identified as 22-year-old Travis Henry Jr. from Montgomery, Alabama. How Henry came to be there, shot in the torso, and without his black BMW, was a mystery at first. The pieces of this puzzle began to fall into place when authorities found Liddell Maynard, Trappa Sparks, along with Wayman McMillian, Kia Sumter, and Terona Horton, orchestrating a deadly scheme. Sumter and Horton had lured Henry to Columbus, setting the stage for a robbery and murder that would end in tragedy. Sparks, who was just 21 years old at the time, faced charges of felony murder, armed robbery, using a gun to commit a crime, and possessing a firearm while on probation. The courtroom was tense as McMillian, Sumter, and Horton took the stand, each pointing the finger at Sparks, testifying that he was the one who fired the fatal shot. Despite their damning statements, None admitted to having planned the robbery, leaving a cloud of ambiguity over the proceedings. Sparks's defense attorney seized upon this uncertainty, noting that the scene of the crime didn't align with a typical robbery. A wad of cash and a broken silver necklace were found next to Henry's body, raising questions about the true motive behind the murder. Despite these arguments, Sparks was ultimately found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. But the drama didn't end there. His own lawyer took the stand and admitted he was guilty and should be behind bars. After his sentencing, Sparks requested to address the court. What followed was a defiant outburst in which he criticized everyone from his own lawyer to the judge and the district attorney. He questioned the credibility of the witness testimonies and even accused the victim's family, maintaining his innocence and insisting that he was being wrongfully convicted based on lies. Sparks's heated outburst left the courtroom divided. Some of his family members walked out in protest, while others reacted with laughter, seemingly unfazed by the gravity of the situation. The judge, unwilling to entertain the chaos, swiftly ended the hearing and moved on to the next case, leaving Sparks to face his fate. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.